ABC made the announcement yesterday following sharp backlash over Kimmel's controversial remarks about the assassination of Turning Point founder Charlie Kirk. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more, including a wave of firings tied to insensitive reactions to Kirk's death.
ABC says it's pulling Jimmy Kimmel Live from its schedule after the comedian's comments about Charlie Kirk's assassination sparked outrage. Kimmel referenced suspect Tyler Robinson in a monologue on ABC.
The MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it.
The suspect's mom says he became increasingly concerned about gay and transgender rights over the last year. Sinclair Broadcasting has announced that its ABC affiliates will now air a special tribute to Kirk in Kimmel's former time slot. Meanwhile, Nexstar Media Group, which operates 32 ABC affiliates, announced it will no longer carry the show, calling Kimmel's remarks offensive and insensitive at a critical time in the national political discourse. FCC Chairman Brendan Carr also weighed in during an interview with commentator Benny Johnson.
In some quarters, there's a very concerted effort to try to lie to the American people.
Carr says Kimmel appears to be trying to play into the narrative that Kirk's assassin was MAGA or Republican motivated.
And if that's what happened here with his conduct, that is really, really sick.
President Trump reacted to the news on Truth Social, writing, "Congratulations to ABC for finally having the courage to do what had to be done." Meanwhile, an ABC reporter has apologized after describing text messages authorities say were exchanged between Charlie Kirk's alleged murderer and the man's boyfriend as very touching. Matt Gutman wrote on X that he was trying to underscore the jarring contrast between the cold-blooded assassination of Charlie Kirk and the personal, disturbing texts. During the ABC broadcast, Gutman said the messages were, quote, "very touching in a way that I think many of us didn't expect. A very intimate portrait into this relationship between the suspect's roommate and the suspect himself, with him repeatedly calling his roommate, who is transitioning, calling him my love." Vice President J.D. Vance also weighed in, condemning individuals who publicly celebrated Kirk's death, speaking on Fox News.
If you were the kind of person who feels joy at the death of a grieving mother and grieving children, what bad decisions have led you to where you are today, and why don't you get back on the right path?
Vance says he's been glad to see civil society stand up and say there are consequences for celebrating the death of a young dad.
We have a First Amendment in this country. The First Amendment protects a lot of very ugly speech, but if you celebrate Charlie Kirk's death, you should not be protected from being fired for being a disgusting person.
That sentiment is playing out across the country. Multiple people have lost their jobs over posts related to Kirk's assassination. Auburn University confirmed several employees were terminated for posts described as hurtful, insensitive, and completely at odds with Auburn's values. Clemson University dismissed 2 faculty members. Florida Atlantic and the University of Miami reprimanded staff. And at Ball State University, the director of health promotion and advocacy was fired after a post she made about Kirk's death. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
And joining us now to discuss this is Dan Schneider, Vice President of the Media Research Center, and we have Christian Toto, award-winning film critic and host of the Hollywood in Toto podcast. So first of all, good afternoon to you both. Dan, I'll start with you today. Can we get your overall thoughts here, your initial reactions to what Kimmel said?
Right. You know, Jimmy Kimmel is perfectly free to say disgusting, vile things. I'm reminded of the KKK and how they will parade down the streets of America and say horrible things. But just like they've got the free speech rights to say those vile, disgusting things, we don't have to accept it as consumers. And employers don't have to keep these people on the payroll. We can fire people if they are racist and sexist, and ABC was right to get rid of Jimmy Kimmel.
Okay, Christian, can you talk to us about free speech here in relation to what ABC did in response?
Yeah, it's been fascinating to watch. You know, Jimmy Kimmel has been one of the people who has basically ignored cancel culture, and even as a comedian who should be aghast about it, has said almost nothing. He kind of chuckled over Tucker Carlson and Roseanne being fired. But having said all that, you know, what he said about Charlie Kirk's murder and trying to pin the blame on MAGA was genuinely reprehensible. And, you know, he had all the time to apologize, to backpedal, and he didn't. He was actually going to double down and say, you took me out of context. So it's a fascinating case. Listen, it's up to ABC to decide in the affiliates whether this goes on. My personal take would be that maybe like 2 weeks suspension to kind of show him the error of his ways, but we'll have to see how things go from here. But it is complicated, and we just don't want the government to say you can't do these things. If the studios say it, if the affiliates say it, that's a different matter.
So Dan, Christian brought up cancel culture. How do you respond to accusations of cancel culture in light of this?
Yeah. I can understand why some people might get confused, but the two are completely different. Cancel culture, as we had to live through for almost a decade, was where the radical left was forcing people to believe and affirmatively articulate viewpoints that many of us disagreed with. And if we didn't toe their line, we were debanked, we were canceled, we were silenced, we lost our jobs because we would not adopt personal views and personal beliefs that we objected to. That's not what's going on here. Charlie Kirk actually platformed. He didn't deplatform people who disagreed with him. He gave them a platform to debate him and to disagree with him. This is what free speech is all about. But that does not mean that if somebody says something disgusting and vile, they're not going to pay the societal consequences for it.
So Christian, do you agree with what you just heard, that this is slightly different than the cancel culture that we used to talk about?
No, yeah, I agree completely. It used to be if you had the wrong opinion or if you said something untoward a decade ago, all of a sudden you were in jeopardy. But I just think it's notable that Jimmy Kimmel just didn't stand up against that scourge in recent years. I mean, he had a great platform. He's a comedian. He actually did some pretty outrageous bits back in the day with The Man Show, and he really should have been on the forefront. Listen, he could be political, he can be progressive, that's perfectly fine. But he really should have defended his fellow comedians who were self-censoring based on what was going on. So that's part of the problem here too.
So Dan, Christian brought up this point as well earlier in his response. Do you think the U.S. government here should be involved in this? We saw pressure from FCC chairman, right? Brendan Carr criticizing Kimmel, saying we can do this the easy way or the hard way. And as well, on top of that, suggesting the FCC could revoke ABC affiliate licenses.
Yeah, if you're a streamer, have an online show, or if you're a cable company, you don't have the kind of restrictions that broadcasters do. But broadcasters use the public airwaves. Those airwaves are owned and controlled by the American people. And it's actually the responsibility, the requirement of the Federal Communications Commission to ensure that these broadcasters are serving the public interest. And the public interest does not mean some narrow sliver of radical left-wing agitators. It means the whole public. So I can understand why there might be an initial concern, people wondering, what is Brendan Carr, the chairman of the FCC, doing? Well, he's required to. He's got to make sure that the public airwaves are actually being used to serve the whole public and not just a sliver of it.
Okay, Christian, so I don't know if you're referring to this, but is the FCC chairman involving in the agency's involving the agency in the network's editorial decisions?
Well, we don't know. I mean, he made comments on a podcast, and then in short order, these affiliates bowed out. So is it cause and effect? We're not quite sure. It does get tricky, and I think for years that everything that was just said has been true, but no one has really applied it to what's going on in the broadcast space. So I think that's one of the differences here. And having said that, this is a national tragedy. This is a major event. And for a broadcaster like Kimmel to go out and say this, either he didn't know it was completely inaccurate, which is shocking, or he knew it and didn't care. And also, again, we should allow for broadcasters to make mistakes and then come back and say, listen, I want to correct the record the next night, because there were more damning pieces of evidence that were just securing the fact that we know exactly what the motivation was here. And yet on Tuesday night, the night after he spoke, he didn't see anything. And he was going to reportedly say, you took me out of context. He couldn't even own up to it then, even when things were getting pretty heated. So it just speaks to him as a broadcaster and not in a good way.
Right. And I'm wondering as well, Dan, how much do you think the FCC's pressure factor into the decision here versus, Nexstar pulling the program from its stations?
Don, you're asking really, really excellent questions. I'm sure that Nexstar and Sinclair were feeling some of that pressure. knowing that they now have an FCC that is actually doing its job in protecting the public airwaves. Let me just add this one last thing. You asked Christian whether the FCC might be sort of monitoring what the programming is in local stations. The Obama administration actually tried to do that. They tried to put their FCC cops into newsrooms, and at that time, a minority commissioner, Ajit Pai, who later became chairman in the first Trump administration, Ajit blew the whistle. The Obama administration was actually trying to control what the content was coming out of news stations, local broadcast news stations. That is unacceptable. That's unconstitutional. And I can almost guarantee you that a chairman, Brendan Carr, would never allow something like that to take place.
That is fascinating. Christian, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a great point. And, I think this entire incident, what it should do is show people across the ideological aisle to say, hey, this kind of suppression is never good. We should always step very carefully. We should follow the law for sure. But that the people who are complaining the most right now, they have to look at what they've done, what they've said, what they tried to do in recent years. It is directly applicable to what's happening right now. And I think that could be the only good side of this, where we come together and say, yes, all of these kind of things are wrong. We need to be careful. At the same time, by the way, ABC should be just more responsible with their programming. What you see on The View, which is also an ABC program, is often reprehensible and completely fact-free and cruel. And the fact that they just haven't stood up until now is a shame on them.
Dan, can we talk about the show itself as well? I mean, there's a number of factors being thrown around here. I'm not sure which one is the biggest contributor, but how has the show been received in recent times? How are the ratings, Dan?
You're talking about Jimmy Kimmel's show?
Yes.
Well, look, he's kind of like Stephen Colbert. His ratings have been in decline. The revenues have been in decline. Stephen Colbert, of course, was taking $40 million per year in an annual salary. I don't think Kimmel has been taking that much money, but the Colbert Show overall was a gigantic loser. But for ABC, its reputation is really on the line. And Christian is exactly right. The View is part of the ABC News division, not the ABC Entertainment division. But The View, they claim, is news, and there's nothing but sort of propaganda and sort of embarrassingly bad content on The View.
So Christian, do you think there's going to be an impact now as of what ABC did to the Jimmy Kimmel Live show? Perhaps it might have an impact on The View, for example, or other late shows like Jimmy Fallon and others.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the best case scenario, they're more careful with what they say as far as being accurate. They all should be accurate. And this fusion between entertainment and comedy and political news is tricky, because you want to promote satire, you want to have sort of a humorous edge. But if you're sharing blatantly false information, you're not doing the public a good service. And listen, if I'm The View, I'd be very worried about this, because what they say on an almost weekly basis would shame and shock Jimmy Kimmel himself. So that's just be better. Your broadcasters, show some responsibility. You can be left of center all day long. You can be progressive. You can share those points of view. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you share absolute falsehoods again and again and again, that's an issue. That's a problem. You're not serving the public at all.
Dan, how did we get here? Where late night shows are becoming increasingly left-wing and at the same time less friendly to conservatives?
Well, look, I guess the sort of connected to that question is what has happened to the Democrat Party. Traditional Democrats don't recognize their party any longer. The leadership of the party has become so radicalized, and then that same sort of leadership has taken over so many different institutions in America: media, entertainment, academia. So then you only have a few voices remaining, like a Bill Maher. Christian is describing Bill Maher, who's politically left of center, but he's remained a traditional Democrat who is standing for truth. And somebody like a Bill Maher was very vocal during the cancel culture movement, saying this is terrible. He has been very vocal in opposing those who are trying to suppress Israel's rights to defend itself. We need more Bill Mahers in news and entertainment today. People really willing to stand up for truth, even though sort of their party has gone off the rails.
You know, Christian, I can't help but wonder here, has there been a cultural shift? Because I'm thinking, would this have happened 3 years ago in the same circumstance?
It's a great question. There's a definite shift happening. Also, it's a media shift as well, because when you think about what Jimmy Kimmel said, I don't think it would get a lot of coverage, if any. As a matter of fact, I don't think the legacy media really talked about it directly, what he said about the Charlie Kirk murderer. It was social media. It was, it was these new platforms and formats. It was podcasts. And all of a sudden the word got out and the pressure started to build. So I think in the past, the legacy media could really, just cover up these stories when celebrities behave badly and say atrocious things, and we wouldn't really know about it. That's no longer the case. They can't cover it up anymore. They would have dragged this one around for a while until they had to cover it. But now, of course, they have to.
Okay, I don't want to take up too much of your guys' time. Dan, I'll just ask you one more question, and then I'll get final thoughts from Christian. So, Dan, what do you think about dozens of ABC stations now are set to air Charlie Kirk tribute specials during Jimmy Kimmel's time slot?
Yeah, look, this is what Sinclair and Next are. These are companies that own lots of these ABC affiliates. Those companies are responding to the community interest. What does the community want? And it's clear from people nationwide mourning the death of Charlie Kirk that we're wanting closure. So I think it's a smart business move, and it's the right move for America.
Okay, Christian, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, just my final thoughts are simple. The left has ignored cancel culture and/or cheered it on. Now they're aghast about it. Whether it's cancel culture exactly. I know we talked about the nuance there. But let's just all come together and say, listen, let's promote free speech. Let's promote responsibility. And let's call people out when they are, abusing the public airwaves. I mean, there's a lot of important lessons to be learned here. And, at the end of the day, I hope Jimmy Kimmel just looks in the mirror and realizes what he did and what he said and why it was so wrong. I just hope that he just finds a little humanity there and said, boy, that was a terrible thing to say. At the end of the day, that was just wrong. I don't know if he's there yet.
Well, gentlemen, great discussion today. Thank you both, Dan, Christian.
Thanks, Tom.
Now, this Sunday, NTD Steve Lance and